I read a journal article that you wrote, and it was a really interesting premise around the role of lived expertise rather than lived experience.
Yep.
And it used a really interesting framework that I had not come across before. Autobiographical ethnography, have I got that correct?
Close. Autoethnography is the method. I mean, autoethnography, I guess it is an unusual academic method. We're used to academics who do surveys or who interview other people to find out about their story. But an autoethnography uses the researcher's own story to explore meaning. And so in this particular case, I was talking about my own experience of incurring a disability 15 years ago, of how I was able to bring that experience into the classroom, how over time I developed an expertise in that also, in disability, and that also changed the classroom experience. So I guess the article, in some ways, maybe it's a bit too egoistic. I'm telling my own story. It's not meant to be that, though. It's just using my experience and my story to convey the idea that academics with lived experience of anything, in this case of disability, and a developed expertise can add depth and richness to classroom teaching.
Yeah, it's a fascinating article, and we will put a link to it in our show notes today. But before we go any further, because I want to explore all of that with you, I'm just going to take a moment to welcome everyone to the Community Matters podcast, the podcast where we explore issues that are important to the community with people who are making a difference. And today I'm joined by Dr Shane Clifton. Dr Clifton is the Director of the Centre for Disability Research and Policy at the University of Sydney. Very importantly, he is a director on our fabulous member organisation, the Disability Trust. And he has told me to call him Shane, but I have told him that you earn the title doctor, and, I think we should use it.
I'll leave that to you. If anyone encounters me in the street, Shane is fine.
Okay, maybe I'll call you Dr. Shane then. So firstly, that whole idea, we hear a lot in our sector about lived experience, about the value of lived experience. But your article talks about it as lived expertise, and I think that elevates it a little bit. And I think, when I think about from a recognition perspective, then we should be also recognising people in their salaries, for example, for lived expertise.
Yeah, look, I mean, the reason in which we wrote and explored that article, I wrote that individual autoethnography on my own, and I've done another one with about 15 people with disability. We combined to talk about it, is that often in situations where people with disability work with professionals, and we might get invited to design programs, so they might co-design a program with people with disability, or we might get invited on boards. Our place in those environments is sort of uncertain, and you'll have heard the word tokenism before. Sometimes we know we've got to bring people with disability onto boards or into the design of programs, so we bring them in, but we don't really know what to do with them. We tend to focus on their story rather than their expertise. And of course, when you bring a person with disability into a room where you might have a very experienced government person and you might have a person with a PhD in a particular area, and you've got a CEO, you've got around the table all these people with professional expertise that often is endorsed by a professional body. So they might be a member of the Medical Association or the Australian Company Directors Board or whatever it happens to be, or a chartered accountant, whatever the area that you're working with. And yet the person with disability is somehow brought into this situation because, well, they've had an experience. And so it sort of carries less weight. So we really wanted to make the case that people with disability do have an experience, but that experience often can and does form into an expertise that should be given the same recognition as the professional expertise. It's often been just as hard fought and as hard won. It might take you, a degree and some postgraduate study and some experience to earn the qualification to become an accountant or a doctor, an occupational therapist. A person with disability has, in a sense, often worked their degree out with dealing with day-to-day life, with adapting to disability, and they'll have their own experience. And so I think we can talk about an expertise that they have in their own lives, in their own situations. So, a person with disability knows as much about their own bodies and about what to do to solve the problems that they face in society and with their own bodies, probably as their doctor does. So there is this sort of individual personal expertise. And depending on what a person with disability chooses to do with their life and career, they can also develop a broader expertise about disability, about its meanings, about the experience of others with disability, because, there's this unique connection that people with disability have when they meet others with disability that gives them a basis to talk and learn from each other and have had a shared set of experiences. So they expand their knowledge to develop an expertise that they then bring into a boardroom or a co-design situation, which is more than just their own individual experience. So you might have this, a particular forum, and they'll hear the stories of the individual. And often those stories might be important and valuable. They'll put a sort of context to what you're discussing, but then the solutions will come often from the professionals. The person who's living through this, who's by dint of, I think people with disability have to learn a sort of a creativity to just navigate everyday life. And so they can bring this creativity and their broader experiences to these other settings, but often they're just not recognised as such. So you can tell at the end of the day, well, we've heard their story, but we've not really incorporated their solutions.
Absolutely. So how do we do it better? How do we help them to understand and to get the best out of us? Yeah,
actually, before we even talk about how we help them, it's actually really interesting to think about ourselves in those roles.
Yeah.
Because they are challenging roles. And I think they actually require a real humility. Because, of course, we have our experience and we have our learnings, but somehow we're trying to represent this broad and diverse community whose experience is often very different to ours. We do have some privilege, often those of us who are invited into these situations that many people don't. So I think one of the strongest things to do is, even though we've got an expertise and developed an expertise and can bring that to these situations, is always also to remind the places that we're in that, hey, we need to be listening to these other stories. And so I often think one of the main things about expertise that often bring into a room is we don't have enough knowledge here. We need to hear other stories. Let's go out and talk to people with disability and provide a way for bringing voices which are more than just my own to these spaces. So, yeah, I'm not sure whether I quite answered your question, but I guess the first thing is to recognise the challenge of our roles. And then I think, if we shouldn't be embarrassed to use the language of expertise. And often we don't want to consider ourselves experts, or we want to be humble. But we shouldn't apologise for what disability has taught us. And, just like, because of course we are small and insignificant, but so are the doctors and so are the occupational therapists. Everyone in that room is both limited and brings in expertise, and that's true for us. And so, we shouldn't be shy to bring forward our opinion, to contradict, to argue, etc. I think, I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Yeah. Well, I think also as an academic, you be used to casting that critical lens over what's presented to you, really, and developing those arguments. Do you think that that your role as an academic helps in your role as an advocate and an advisor?
Look, certainly I'm fortunate. I've got a dual sort of expertise, and I should actually say that's true for many people with disability as well. They don't just come into a room with their individual expertise, but they'll have often worked in policy roles or worked in organisations or gotten a degree. So most people with disability are more than their disability. They bring both the disability and those other experiences. And look, I'm fortunate to come with an academic background. My particular discipline was originally in theology and ethics, less theology now, more focused on disability studies, but that, theology and ethics is about life and its meanings and its complexities, and what do you do when things go wrong, and how do you, how do you critique a situation and recognise that there's a need for justice and change here. So I think bringing that background combined with the disability background, which is also about, not just the individual impairment, but social change. It's about human rights. And I think those are a rich combination of skills to bring into, co-design situations or governance situations.
It certainly is. In your article, you actually talk about how you feel like you became a better teacher. You were already teaching before you acquired your disability. And then you say you became a better teacher after you became disabled.
Yeah, look, I was 39 years old when I had my injury. I'd been teaching for about 10 years at a theological college. I was jumping a push bike with my children down in a youth facility at Nowra on the south coast. Landed upside down and broke my fourth and fifth vertebrae, which gave me quadriplegia. I spent 7 months in hospital, and you're adjusting to the physical demands or changes that go on in your life, which are sort of completely life-changing. But you're also adjusting to the change in your sense of identity. You're dealing with grief. And so when you come back to the classroom in those initial stages, and, you're talking, again, theology and ethics are all about what do you do when life is hard, when things go wrong, when you make mistakes, how do you rebuild and how do you renew? And so suddenly I went from many of these ideas being largely abstract and theoretical to being able to bring my own experience to the classroom. And what was fun about that was you're not just bringing answers there, because, there's no easy answers to how you adjust to living with disability. It just takes time, and, there's no quick solutions to grief. But you don't have to provide answers per se, but take students in the journey of learning with you. And so I really did find it was just a great joy to go into the classroom. Adjusting to spinal cord injury was really hard in multiple areas of life, but the one place in which I actually was able to feel like I flourished was back in the classroom, which was lucky. I think many people, when they incur a spinal cord injury, can't go back to the job they were doing before. I was in one of these strange situations where I could go back to the job and actually do it better than I did before. So that was pretty fortunate.
Wow.
So that was just my own experience I was bringing to the classroom, and that was valuable. But over time, I started to interact with the disability community and learn more about disability, and then that reframed my own experience and my own self-understanding in ways that actually helped me adjust to the disability. So just the first time I encountered the social model of disability, just a radical change in my own self-understanding to start to sort of think of I don't need to explain that model on this podcast, do I?
Oh, I think it'd be lovely to explain. I think our listeners would be really interested.
Right. Well, we tend to think of disability as a problem with the individual, that they're broken in some way or another. And so that's called the medical model of disability. And it tends to frame the way in which systems interact with people with disability. They're broken and it's our role to somehow fix them. We concentrate, the problem of disability then is the individual. And so let's solve that problem. Whereas the social model of disability, which sort of arose by disability advocates in the 70s and 80s, says the primary problem of disability is not the individual, but the society that's badly shaped to enable the individual to flourish. And when you switch your focus from the problem of the individual to the problems of society, then it just changes the way you think about yourself, about the environment you encounter. So no longer am I depressed because I can't get into this venue, and oh woe is me. It's suddenly I'm angry because I can't get into this venue, and I recognise that I need to do something about that. So it changes the way you think of yourself as an individual, and it changes the way in which you approach the society. And so I weirdly read about that in academic circles, and then met people with disability, and just had the great privilege of working in the disability space. I joined the Centre for Disability Research and Policy in 2013, ended up working for a Royal Commission, and I was then able to bring to the classroom and other spaces not only my personal experience, but what I'd learnt from meeting so many people with different disabilities. At the Royal Commission, I worked with really diverse disabilities, became really great friends with Ron McCallum, who's blind, and Alex Jones, who's deaf, and a really wide array of disabilities. And it's one of the great joys of disability, actually, that, before I'd had a disability, there was this whole world of people that I just hadn't really encountered, which is sort of weird because, there's 20% of the population has disability. Why hadn't I encountered them? Well, that's probably a statement because our society is badly shaped and we don't meet them in everyday life. But when I incurred this disability, I met this amazing population and was just really enriched by it. This is a population that had transformed the way the world works, and had done amazing things. In fact, if it wasn't for this group of people and the work that they'd done in the 80s and 90s, my own life would have been terrible. So, they really changed the world in such a way that enabled me to participate more than I would have been able to do 20 years ago. And I guess I felt also then the responsibility to make my little contribution to that change moving forward, and was lucky enough to be able to do that at the Disability Royal Commission and now at the university.
That was the question I was going to ask you. Did you feel, having met these amazing, inspirational people, that sense of responsibility to keep that work going? And I think about Justin Yerbury and the work that absolutely the work he led on MND research, but actually the work he led on making the Illawarra aware of how not accessible a lot of the area is.
Yeah, wonderful man. I was fortunate enough to meet him at a basketball court. I got tickets right next to him at watching the Hawks. Had season tickets near him for a year. Wonderful man. Great loss to the community, his death. But yeah, look, I do understand that not every person with disability wants to work in disability. Disability is not the whole of a person's life. But I loved encountering this disability space. So I don't want to sound all altruistic. I'm not just doing this because, I can make this huge difference to others. I mean, I'd like to think I can make a small difference to others, but I'm doing it because it's just exciting and thrilling, and it's delightful to be able to bring change. And I love meeting people with disability and working in this sector. So I guess I feel fortunate that I've been able to work in this sector. It's given me a lot of meaning and purpose. I think if you think about the challenge of adjusting to spinal cord injury, there's so many things that I've lost, and yet meeting the disability community is one of the amazing things that I've gained. And I don't think I'm going to change the world. I think the world is too complex and difficult. But if I can make some small changes along the way, then I'll have spent my time well living with this disability.
And you are actually, beyond the work that you're doing at the Centre for Disability Research and Policy, you're also making a contribution as a director on a disability organisation. What made you go into governance?
Yeah, look, I'd served on boards, both so I'd served on a governance board of a theological college in a former part of my life. I was appointed as president of the board of Spinal Cord Injuries Australia, and I served on that board for quite a few years. It just gives you the opportunity, to give back to this community. I was invited to join the Disability Trust Board, and was, just thrilled to be able to do it, to make a contribution, to bring, again, if you think about the diverse expertise we started with, we're talking about, the fact that the board will have, and most boards have people on them who come with legal expertise or financial expertise. But it's amazing how few boards in the disability space have people with lived experience. And it's one of the major gaps in too many disability service providers boards. So I'm really proud of the Disability Trust that, they did this before I was there. I was lucky enough to be brought on to bring that experience. During the course of last year, they appointed a person with intellectual disability to the board as well. And that's really unique in the disability space, recognising the expert contributions that people with intellectual disability can bring to boards. We just bring another set of experiences to the matrix of skills that should make up diverse boards. And again, I think we bring a contribution, we bring culture change, we ask questions that others aren't asking, and I feel lucky to be able to do it.
And we're sitting here in Southern Youth and Family Services in their fabulous facility here. They are a youth homelessness service, and they have for a long time had a commitment to having young people with lived experience of homelessness on their board, just to bring that voice of experience, that voice of expertise to their boards. It's something that a lot of our sector could be really embracing. And as you say, if there's a lack in a lot of disability boards, it's an area that we should all be looking more at.
Yeah, look, it can, for those of you who have sat on boards, and when you hear the lived experience voice at times, it can stop you in its tracks because it will raise something that you hadn't thought of, or help you just as a reminder of how serious the issues that you're dealing with, whether that's disability inclusion or homelessness. There's so much well-meaning paternalism that happens in the professional space, and people with disability have historically been subject to that paternalism, which it is well-meaning. People are empathetic and kind, but they often operate in disempowering ways. And it's amazing how the desire to help can often create a sort of a hierarchy that keeps the people that you're trying to help with oppressed and down. And so the fundamental motto and the driving motto of the disability rights community has been nothing about us without us. And I'm absolutely committed to that. That's why we're talking about lived experience and lived expertise. It's just, we wouldn't think it was good enough, would we, in feminist spaces to run a female organisation without women. I mean, it's so silly that it's laughable. Or, historically, they've run Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander services without black people. And nowadays, there would be outrage if that was the way you were to do those things. And yet the one space in which we don't even question it, again, because the prevailing ableist assumption of the incapacity of people with disability who need the help of non-disabled people, is that we don't question the nothing about us without us. So, I think that's changing in disability services. Again, I'm not opposed. In fact, quite the opposite. People with disability can't solve the problems of the world, of an inaccessible world on their own. We absolutely need allies and experts and people with financial skills and lawyers and people with all diverse experiences to work together. But it's no longer good enough to exclude the expertise of the people we're working primarily for, because that creates, structures of power that unintentionally weaken the populations we're trying to help and serve.
I'm going to wrap it up shortly. But before we do let you go, the question that we ask everybody is, this podcast is called Community Matters. Can you tell us about someone in the community that matters to you? Yeah.
Look, I thought long and hard about this, and I felt like I actually wanted to say my children, who have just made so much difference to my life, and my wife, but I'm going to pick my peer support worker, Cherie Hurley, who met me in hospital. Now, she's dead now, died a few years ago, but in the middle of the sort of trial of adjusting to how can I make a go of this new life where I feel like I've lost everything, and the person who really transformed early on my sense of what's possible was Cherie, who was a peer support worker. She was about my age. She had this wonderful support dog, quadriplegic, about my level, and just met me in hospital week on and week out for the months in which I was there, and really renewed my sense of hope with this injury and just transformed my experience. I was able to spend time with her after I'd left the hospital as well. And so I guess I elevate her as a representative of the work that peer support people do in hospitals and in people's homes. And I'm thinking of people with disability, but there's peer support workers in all of these industries, and often they're underpaid or volunteer, and again, their expertise is not recognised. And so I guess I'm celebrating the expert and amazing contribution of peer support workers. A doctor can tell you something, but when you hear it from someone who's lived it, it's just profoundly and deeply meaningful.
Oh, well. Shout out to Cherie and to all peer support workers. The work you're doing is making a real difference.
It is indeed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shane. That's been a really, really fascinating discussion. We could have gone so many places. I think we'll have to have you back. But thank you for being with us and giving us your time and sharing your expertise and teaching me autoethnography. It's a new term I had not come across, and definitely a journal article that was really different for me. Like, it engaged me in a completely different way, because I'm always so used to journal articles that are third party,
boring, hard to read, insightful, but Yeah, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at that article. It's very, very insightful. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for tuning in to Community Matters, the podcast where we explore the issues that are important in our community with people who are making a difference. Please do like us and share, leave us a review, and tune in next time for more Community Matters.